Have you ever felt like life was just a video game? What about religion? Have you ever considered that it's basically just a game of eternal reward and punishment for the winners and losers? That's what we'll be talking about in this episode of The Kayse Melone Show. We'll look at how religion uses game mechanics to shape belief and behavior, how purity culture functions like a moral points system, and why Christian nationalism has been able to take hold in the United States using these same tactics. And of course, we'll talk about what happens when you stop playing the game altogether. Welcome back to the Kayse Melone Show. My name is Kayse Melone, and I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're talking about something I've been thinking about for a long time, the way religion functions like a game, specifically how it is the gamification of spirituality. I don't mean this in a dismissive way, but in a very literal sense, like how belief systems use rules, rewards, punishments, and progression mechanics to keep people engaged, just like a well-designed game. Think about it. In gaming, you have objectives, levels, milestones, and consequences for your actions. And religion, especially high control ones like evangelical fundamentalist Christianity, operates in the same way. You're given a clear goal: salvation, heaven, enlightenment, divine favor. There are specific rules you have to follow to stay on track, ways to level up your faith, and even penalties for stepping out of bounds, like, I don't know, an eternity in hell and the lake of fire and gnashing of teeth. Kind of a big deal here. Before we get started, I am once again making the disclaimer that I want everyone to find their own sense of peace and fulfillment. This includes Christians. I have a lot of Christians commenting on my content on this podcast and telling me their beliefs aren't going to change, and that's fine. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. I'm here for the people who have deconstructed from evangelical fundamentalist Christianity. I'm here for the people who are currently deconstructing from evangelical fundamentalist Christianity. And I'm here for the people who are simply interested in the process altogether. I'm not mad at everyday Christians, but I will continue to challenge the systems of power that are preying on their vulnerabilities. Now let's move on. A lot of what I'm talking about today was inspired by the book Playing with Reality by Kelly Clancy, and I will link it in the episode show notes if you're interested in getting your own copy. This was such a good book. Neuroscientist and physicist Kelly Clancy wrote this book, and I was lucky enough to be sent it for free to review it, and I was pleasantly surprised. I didn't really know what to expect, but essentially the book does an incredibly thorough deep dive into game theory and how the play of games from childhood into adulthood affect the way we navigate the world. In her book, Clancy explores how games have influenced everything from military strategy to artificial intelligence to economics, and even how we understand human psychology. She argues that we don't just play games, games play us. One of the key ideas in the book is that games simplify reality, turning complex, unpredictable worlds into structured environments with clear rules, objectives, and rewards. They give us a sense of control. And when we play within these structures, we get hooked on progression, the idea that if we just follow the rules, we'll succeed and level up. Now, that sounds a lot like religion already for some of us, right? Like, especially in traditions that focus on clear rules or sin as an inherent form of failure or heaven as the ultimate reward. And when you look at the modern evangelical movement, especially in the United States, it operates a lot like a game. Think about it. There are clear objectives. Again, be saved, follow the Bible, spread the gospel. There's a scoring system where sin sets you back, good deeds move you forward, and prayer resets the clock. There are levels like baptism, spiritual growth, leadership roles. Each step gets you closer to God. And leaderboards, who's the most devout, who prays the most, who wins the most converts. And the ultimate reward, of course, is heaven, eternal paradise if you play the game right. And I already know that I'm going to get a lot of Christians commenting on this, that this is so unfair, this is not about a game, it's not about leveling up and all of that stuff. And I just want to challenge Christians to just listen to the video and see if there's any nugget of truth that you might see in the idea of any religious system, any belief system, any denomination, any specific sect of Christianity, however you want to call yourself a Christian. Just imagine for a second that maybe there is a level of gamification involved. And honestly, this isn't just a metaphor. Many evangelical Christian churches explicitly use gamification strategies to keep people engaged. Youth ministries hand out points for attendance, reading scripture, and inviting friends. I have a Bible reading contest when I was growing up in my youth group. There are Christian apps that turn prayer into streaks, much like Duolingo gamifies language learning. And even evangelical conversion itself follows a game-like logic. You win when you convince someone to accept Jesus, earning spiritual credit and growing your own status in the faith community. Clancy's book shows us that games work because they hack our psychology. They use things like intermittent rewards. Which means that you don't get a reward every time you do something right, but just enough to keep you coming back. For example, sometimes prayers get answered, sometimes they don't. The uncertainty makes believers double down because just like in a casino, the next win might be just around the corner. Status-driven motivation, which is the idea that you want to be better than others or at least keep up. Evangelical culture also rewards those who are on fire for God. The most passionate believers, the best evangelists, and those with the most faith-based influence get leadership roles, social approval, and often even financial gain. There's also the fear of loss, which is the idea that you don't want to lose progress, and in religious terms, that means your soul. For example, the concept of backsliding in Christianity. This is a term that basically means fear of loss, a function of our internal psychology. A backsliding Christian is someone who knowingly drifts away from their faith, either by becoming spiritually stagnant or by consciously rejecting God's teachings. It refers to a person who has encountered Jesus but chooses to stop progressing in their faith or deliberately turns away from it. If you stop going to church, stop praying, or even question your faith, you risk losing everything. Salvation isn't always permanent in some traditions. You have to maintain it in some traditions. So again, this plays off of our internal fear of losing status in our community. As we're biologically engineered to be social creatures, this has damning consequences. This all creates a deeply compelling system that makes faith feel urgent, exciting, and deeply personal. But what happens when a system like this is abused? We'll be talking more about that here in a bit. The thing is, gamification isn't inherently bad. Clancy says in her book that games sanitize and soften the realm of the unexpected, allowing us to explore and enjoy uncertainty in a non-threatening way. Gamification can motivate people, create a sense of belonging, and even encourage personal growth. But when you apply game mechanics to something as deep as spirituality, things can get dangerous. And here's why. It creates an us versus them mentality. Games are competitive. They divide people into teams, winners and losers. In evangelical Christianity, this often translates to the saved versus unsaved, believers versus non-believers. And the result is deep tribalism where questioning the game itself makes you an enemy. It also prioritizes winning over truth. The goal in a game is to win, right? Well, in gamified faith or spirituality, the goal is to get as many people as possible to accept Jesus, not necessarily to seek deep personal wisdom or ask tough questions. This isn't the truth in every single case, but I'm going to stick with generalizations in this episode. This can lead to shallow, fear-based conversions rather than genuine spiritual growth. Gamification can also be exploited by leaders. If a system is designed to reward specific behaviors, those in charge can manipulate it for personal gain. Televangelists, megachurch pastors, and Christian influencers often benefit from the way gamified faith keeps people engaged and donating. Gamification also turns spirituality into a transaction. The idea of if you do X, God will bless you, turns faith into a formula. And when that formula fails, when prayers go unanswered, when suffering doesn't stop, it can lead to a deep disillusionment. Many people leave evangelicalism because they feel like they played the game right, but still lost. Now we're going to be diving even deeper into just how evangelical fundamentalist Christianity is essentially one big game. Now, I would argue that most, if not all, of religious belief systems are a form of gamification, but I'm mostly going to focus on evangelical fundamentalist Christianity because one, that's the religious upbringing that I was raised in and have the most experience with, and two, Christian nationalism is such a serious threat to our current way of life, personal autonomy, and human dignity here in the United States political climate. More on that later. Christianity, particularly in its more rigid and institutionalized forms, sets up a structured system that, at first glance, appears to provide purpose, moral guidance, and security. However, when we look deeper, it becomes clear that this structure is less about personal empowerment and more about control. The rules and objectives of the faith do not just shape behavior, they define identity, limit autonomy, and create a constant sense of inadequacy. The ultimate goal is not self-actualization or personal growth, but obedience and submission. This is where Christianity, rather than empowering its followers, can become profoundly disempowering and even harmful. At its core, Christianity presents a high-stakes, all-or-nothing mission: be saved or be condemned for eternity. I talk about this a lot, how the reason evangelical fundamentalist Christians are so intense about their beliefs is because they truly believe deep down that they are not just fighting the good fight here on earth. They're battling to save their souls for an eternity in either heaven or hell. Gnashing of teeth, lake of fire, etc. That's intense to say the least. This binary structure forces believers into a perpetual state of existential anxiety. If salvation is the only acceptable outcome, then everything in life becomes a test of worthiness. The fear of hell and eternity of suffering for making the wrong choices means that every decision is fraught with spiritual consequences. There is no room for genuine exploration, for making mistakes, or for personal moral reasoning outside of what the church prescribes or the Bible. This cultivates a mindset of fear, dependency, and self-policing rather than one of confidence, curiosity, and self-determination. Beyond just belief, Christianity imposes a rigid code of conduct that controls not only outward actions but also thoughts and emotions. The doctrine of sin ensures that believers are never truly free from guilt no matter how devout they are. Even private doubts or impure thoughts or moments of anger can be considered failings, and they require confession, repentance, or a deeper surrender to God's will, and this instills a constant state of feeling unworthy. An idea reinforced through teachings about human depravity. Many denominations emphasize that people are inherently sinful and cannot trust themselves, creating a cycle in which believers must rely on religious authority to tell them what is right. And personal intuition, independent moral reasoning, and emotional autonomy are all sacrificed to maintain obedience to the system. Christianity also weaponizes the promise of rewards and the threat of punishment to maintain control. Heaven is framed as the ultimate prize, something that can only be achieved through strict adherence to doctrine. And I already know I'm going to get a lot of pushback from that. But even if the doctrine is just that you need to believe that Jesus was raised from the dead, even if that is the only thing that you claim makes you a Christian, that is still a doctrine that someone needs to adhere to for an eternity, to be saved for eternity. Okay, that is still a rule. If the only rule, if you're gonna come to me and say, no, true, quote unquote, true Christianity is not about following the rules, Kayse, it's about a relationship with Jesus. That is a logical contradiction. The rule that you're telling me is that you need to have a relationship with Jesus. That is a rule, plain and simple. Meanwhile, the idea of earthly suffering is sometimes the result of disobedience, or it's a test from God, and can be used to justify anything from abusive religious leadership to purity culture to economic oppression. If suffering is always part of a divine plan, then injustice, exploitation, and harm within Christian communities are not problems to be solved, but burdens to be endured. This mentality disempowers people from advocating for themselves, setting boundaries, or walking away from toxic environments. Perhaps most insidiously, Christianity does not just impose rules on its followers, it demands that its followers enforce them on others. The evangelical mission to save souls becomes an obligation, forcing believers to view those outside the faith as lost or broken. In the end, Christianity does not empower. It strips believers of their autonomy, replaces confidence with fear, and turns personal morality into an externalized system of control. I cannot say that enough. Rather than fostering true personal growth or ethical self-reflection, it demands unwavering allegiance to Jesus. Okay? And as much as I want to be okay with the idea that Christianity is just about a relationship with Jesus, again, number one, that's a rule. And number two, then why do you care how other people are living their life? Now, again, I'm not trying to speak to every single Christian's specific set of beliefs. There are an infinity of ways to interpret Christianity, but as a whole, these fundamental issues are exactly what I'm saying they are: dangerous and disempowering. And again, if true Christianity is about a relationship with Jesus and not about following the rules, why do you start to evangelize and try to control how other people live their lives, including homosexuals and atheists, for example? You're acting in a way that suggests it is, in fact, about following the rules. Moving on, let's talk about this concept of gamified progression in the church. Again, progression is this leveling up within the game system that we're talking about. So Christianity presents faith as a journey with clear milestones, just like leveling up in a game, as much as many Christians would like to claim otherwise. But at first, the process seems natural, even comforting. As a child, you start with the basics: Bible stories, simple prayers, and the reassuring message that Jesus loves you. But as you grow older, the expectations shift. You are no longer just learning, you are required to commit, to prove your faith through action, to get a purity ring. Baptism is often the first major step, making your public declaration of belief. From there, you are encouraged to get involved, attending church regularly, joining the youth group, leading Bible studies, and eventually evangelizing to others. For those seen as truly devoted, the highest levels of faith are held up as the ultimate goal. Mission work, ministry, or becoming a church leader are framed as the pinnacle of spiritual achievement. The more you dedicate your life to the church, the more you are praised and affirmed. And at first, this might feel like growth, like progress, but in reality, it is a system that slowly strips away your ability to question, explore, or define your own path. This structured progression is particularly dangerous for people when they are at their most vulnerable. Christianity does not allow space for authentic self-discovery. If that brings you discomfort, if that makes you upset, then I'm encouraging you to look inwardly and just really question why that is. Is it maybe because it's true? Christianity dictates what your identity should be at every stage of life. If you're struggling, if you feel lost, if you're questioning where you are, the answer in Christianity is always the same: pray more, have a better understanding of the Bible, commit more to Jesus, give up more yourself, and read the same damn book over and over and over again. Doubt is not treated as a normal part of personal development, but as a spiritual failing that must be overcome. If you start to feel disconnected from your faith, the system convinces you that you are the problem, not the belief itself. For many, this rigidity becomes suffocating. Like myself, the path was already laid out and there was no acceptable deviation, only obedience, and in the case of women in the church, submission to their husbands. If your personal desires, values, or identity do not fit within the framework, you are expected to suppress them. LGBTQIA+ individuals, for example, are often told that their very existence is incompatible with God's plan. Women are frequently pressured into traditional gender roles regardless of their own ambitions. Those who experience trauma or mental health struggles are given faith-based solutions rather than real psychological support. Instead of being encouraged to grow from their most authentic selves, believers are molded into what the system demands from them. And what happens when someone realizes they can't keep up with this? When the pressure to conform becomes too much, there is no safety net outside of the game, essentially, unless you take the time to build one for yourself. Because leaving means losing your community, your identity, and sometimes even your family. In a lot of the cases that I've talked to, people become completely alone. Those who walk away are often labeled as failures or crazy or backsliders or worse, people who never truly believed in the first place. I get told that all the time, like, because I'm an atheist now, a lot of Christians say, well, you were never a true Christian in the first place. Like, wow, you must have it all figured out. And this idea keeps many people trapped in a system that no longer serves them because they're afraid of what life might look like outside the rigid rules of their faith. In the end, Christianity's structured progression does not nurture personal growth. It demands conformity at the expense of authenticity. As mentioned earlier, Christianity also relies on the gamification of rewarding and punishing its followers. And the Bible backs this up. The concept of salvation, for instance, is built on a foundation of fear. You wouldn't need to be saved unless there was something to be saved from. That denotes fear. The entire system ensures you that you're constantly aware of this fear too. A fear of what? Fear of hell. Again, a huge, that's a very intense fear to have. A fear of hell. Of course, the system's going to continue reinforcing that if you don't follow the rules, aka have a relationship with Jesus, okay, you're going to hell. eternal suffering, separation from God, and complete failure. A lot of Christians tell me this too, that it's not just about hell, that you're going to be separated from God. Like, I can't do, if Christianity, number one, claims that God is omnipresent, but then an eternity in hell has to do with the separation from God, those are contradictions. Oh my good goddess. From the moment you learn about Christianity, you're taught that this is the most important decision you will ever make. Choose correctly and you gain everything. Choose wrong and you lose everything forever. And this fear strips people of true freedom. Instead of making choices based on personal values and desires, believers are conditioned to ask, is this what God wants? Will this keep me safe? Am I risking hell? Every major life decision, who to marry, what career to pursue, what relationships to maintain, is filtered through this lens of fear. Authenticity becomes impossible when your entire life is dictated by the need to avoid eternal punishment. In Playing with Reality, Kelly Clancy talks about B.F. Skinner's work in psychology regarding rewards and punishment. Skinner called this phenomenon reinforcement, and he studied the attraction and repulsion of reward and punishment in humans and animals. One of Skinner's quotes is, "It is a mistake to suppose that the whole issue is how to free man. The issue is to improve the way in which he is controlled." And that is, to me, a summary of religion. The Bible is filled with examples of how Christianity structures spirituality around a system of rewards and punishment, reinforcing a gamified framework where obedience leads to eternal divine blessings and disobedience results in severe consequences, to say the least. One of the clearest examples is the story of Adam and Eve in Genesis 3. The Garden of Eden represents an ideal starting level where everything is provided, all of your resources, but there's one rule: don't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That determines success or failure in this game. And their disobedience results in immediate punishment. They're exiled from paradise, they have to go through suffering, and now they're mortal. This sets a precedent from the beginning that breaking God's rules leads to severe consequences. In Deuteronomy 28, Moses lays out an explicit reward and punishment system for the Israelites. Deuteronomy 28:1 says, "If you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all of his commands I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations on earth." Sounds like a rule and reward or punishment. This basically suggests that those who obey God's commandments will be blessed with prosperity, health, and victory over their enemies. Again, however, disobedience will bring famine, disease, and even exile. And we see this played out in so many stories in the Bible. Essentially a divine leaderboard where faithfulness ensures success while failure results in more suffering. And the New Testament continues this system. Don't come at me and just say that that was just about the Old Testament God, particularly in Matthew 25:46, where Jesus describes the final judgment. Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. Heaven is framed as the ultimate reward once again, while hell is the ultimate penalty once again. And this reinforces a high-stakes, all-or-nothing spiritual game. Jesus said it, okay, not me. In Matthew 7, Jesus emphasizes that merely claiming to follow him isn't enough. True obedience and righteous actions are required to enter the kingdom of heaven. Sounds like it is about following the rules, folks. He tells of the judgment day when many will be turned away with the words, "I never knew you," despite their good works. This passage stresses that success in the game of salvation is based on how well one adheres to God's expectations, not just outward appearances or words. The reward for obedience is eternal life. The parable of the talents in Matthew 25, another illustration of the idea of spiritual leveling up. A master gives 3 servants varying amounts of money to manage while he's away. The 2 who invest and multiply the funds are rewarded with greater responsibility and the master's approval, while the one who buries his money out of fear is cast into darkness as punishment. This parable frames the faithful use of God-given gifts as a way to earn greater rewards. Another example comes in the story of the rich man and Lazarus in Luke 16, where the rich man's earthly selfishness leads to his punishment in hell, while the poor man, Lazarus, who suffered in life, is rewarded in heaven. This highlights, again, a spiritual game of moral choices. In the end, Christianity doesn't just offer salvation, it creates the fear that makes salvation necessary. It convinces you that you are in danger, that you are broken, that you need to be rescued. And once that fear takes hold, it becomes almost impossible to see beyond it. And again, for Christians who absolutely refuse to question this, I don't hate you, I pity you. Let's talk about spiritual warfare because this is a big one. Christianity frames life as an ongoing battle between good and evil, both here on earth and then in heaven. And every believer is essentially drafted into this war. And this isn't just a metaphor, it's a deeply ingrained doctrine known as spiritual warfare. According to Ephesians 6:12, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." In other words, the struggles of life aren't just random hardships, they're the result of an invisible cosmic battle between God and Satan, between angels and demons, and every Christian is expected to take up arms. Another quote from the book Playing with Reality. "It's common for people to confuse their personal goals with those quietly manufactured for them by the games in which they participate, wittingly or unwittingly." Much like a video game where characters must complete quests and prove their strength through challenges, Christians are taught that their faith must be tested through trials. These trials come in many forms: resisting temptation, enduring suffering, and remaining faithful despite doubt or hardship. Every struggle is framed as either a test from God to strengthen you or an attack from Satan meant to destroy you. There is no neutral ground. If you experience pain, loss, or hardship, you are trained to see it not as a random misfortune, but as a battlefield where your soul is at stake, your eternity. Again, every temptation that Christians experience in their mind is a direct assault from Satan or his demons or fallen angels, okay? They're not, if you struggle with doubt, it's not just a normal human experience, it's the enemy whispering lies to lead you astray. And if you suffer depression, anxiety, or fear, you may be told that you are under a demonic attack, and the only solution is to pray harder or to be a better Christian or to have more faith or whatever the fuck you want to say. There's something that you have to do within the Christian realm and you have to surround yourself with believers who reinforce this battle narrative. Worse still, I think that the mentality of being in spiritual warfare leads to paranoia. When you believe that unseen forces are constantly trying to manipulate and destroy you, it's impossible to ever feel safe. Your own thoughts can betray you. People outside the faith can be agents of darkness. The world itself becomes hostile, full of demonic traps waiting to ensnare you. And this isolates believers, making them dependent on their church community and reinforcing the idea that questioning or leaving the faith is the ultimate failure, and it gives victory to Satan himself. And again, my heart goes out to Christians who, when they are presented with facts that seem to go against their belief system, with scientific empirical evidence that seems to go against the Bible, this thousands of year old book, whenever they see this, instead of being open-minded and willing to think critically, they double down in their beliefs and just say that somebody else just doesn't get it. They don't have a true understanding of Jesus or the Bible or whatever the fuck they want to say. Like, my heart goes out to these people because it breaks my heart, because I know what it was like to be in that faith and just to double down in your belief over and over again until at some point you don't even have a personal identity. Your entire identity is outside of you. And some of them claim that this is a great thing. They love this. They love that their entire identity can be broken down into just Jesus and the Bible. And I guess if it brings you peace and fulfillment, as long as you're not interfering with other people's peace and fulfillment, like, I love that for you, but it just breaks my heart. In the end, Christianity's emphasis on spiritual warfare keeps believers locked in a constant state of fear and struggle. There's always another battle, another enemy, another test of faith. But the truth is, the war only exists if you believe it does. When you look at it this way, it's easy to see why people get so deeply entrenched in religious systems. Like a well-designed game, it's immersive. It gives people a sense of purpose, progress, and achievement. But there's a dark side too, because when your entire sense of self-worth and identity are tied to playing the game correctly, it's terrifying to even consider stepping outside of it. Now, Nowhere is the subjugation of women in the church more obvious than in purity culture. Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about next. If evangelical Christianity is a game, purity culture is one of its most rigid mechanics, a system where a woman's moral value is literally tracked by how well she controls her own body. While men are expected to resist temptation, the primary burden of purity culture falls on women. Women are held responsible not only for their own purity, but also for the purity of the men around them, usually by what they wear. From an early age, Christian girls are taught that their bodies are both sacred and dangerous. They are sacred because they are vessels meant only for a future husband, and dangerous because they have the power to lead men into sin. This belief manifests in countless rules about modesty, behavior, and emotional restraint. Girls are told to cover up, to avoid being too loud, too flirtatious, or too assertive. Anything that might cause a man to stumble becomes their personal responsibility. And for women, purity culture is all about maintaining a score, specifically virginity. Virginity is the ultimate achievement. You start the game with a perfect record with your virginity, and you have to keep it that way. Every decision is a point gained or lost. What you wear, who you date, how you interact with men, how much temptation you allow in your life. Women are constantly reminded that even the smallest misstep can have lifelong consequences. Wearing a skirt that's too short, minus points. Holding hands with a boyfriend, you're starting down a slippery slope. Kissing before marriage, that's dangerous territory. The key message is clear. Once you lose purity points, you can never fully get them back. And yet, men do not live under the same level of scrutiny. While they are told to remain pure, their slip-ups are often met with grace, excuses, and second chances. Boys will be boys. Men are visual creatures. They can struggle with lust, but women must be the gatekeepers. A woman's worth is tied to her purity in a way that a man's never is. Purity culture operates on a reward and punishment system. If you follow the rules, you are promised the ultimate prize, a godly husband, a perfect marriage, and divine blessings. Aha! Man, that used to sound like the ultimate prize to me, but now it certainly does not. You will be cherished, you'll be valued and protected, you're told. If you mess up even slightly, your value decreases permanently. Women who have sex before marriage are compared to chewed up gum, crumpled flowers, used tape, things that can never be restored to their original state. When I was doing stand-up comedy for 7 years, I always told a joke about my honest to goddess sex talk during chapel when I was at the Bible-based private school affiliated with a non-denominational megachurch here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we had a guest speaker who pulled out a tube of Colgate toothpaste, squeezed out the contents of the toothpaste onto a tarp, and then told us that what comes out can't be put back in. And I'll leave it to your imagination what the punchline of that joke was. I'm gonna be real with you. I don't think the love of money is the root of all evil. I think that repressed sexuality is the root of all evil. And if you think about it, you will see the truth in that. For many of us who have deconstructed, breaking free from purity culture has been one of the hardest but most rewarding parts, because it's not just about rejecting a rule, it's about unlearning an entire framework that shaped how we see ourselves, our bodies, and our relationships. Purity culture doesn't just impact a woman's sex life. It affects her self-worth, her ability to set boundaries, her understanding of consent, and her relationship with her own desires. Many Christian women report feeling disconnected from their own bodies, struggling with deep-seated shame, or experiencing anxiety and guilt around sex, even in marriage. And this damage doesn't stop with the individual woman. It impacts entire communities. Purity culture grooms women for submission. It teaches them to ignore red flags, to accept mistreatment, and to see suffering as part of their spiritual duty. It keeps women small, compliant, and afraid. One of the biggest lies of purity culture is that women choose it. The church often argues this, that no one is forcing women to follow these rules, that they are simply choosing to honor God with their bodies and their husbands. But this is a false choice. When your entire identity, community, and spiritual well-being are tied to following these rules, the pressure is overwhelming. Escaping purity culture isn't just about rejecting certain beliefs, it's about reclaiming personal power. It's about recognizing that your body is not a source of shame, that your worth is not determined by whether or not you have sex. There are two Marys in the New Testament. Testament. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Jesus. Those are the two most prominent women in the New Testament. And both of these women, the reason that they are prominent is how much or how little sex they had. Some women find empowerment in exploring their sexuality on their own terms. Others find strength in simply refusing to feel shame about their past. For the first time after leaving purity culture, they get to decide what their bodies mean to them, not what the church says they should mean. The truth is, purity culture was never about protecting women. It was about controlling them. It was about ensuring that women remained submissive, obedient, and dependent on the church and their husband. Because a woman who owns her own body, her desires, and her choices is a woman who cannot be controlled, and that makes her powerful. Religious gamification doesn't just play out in our personal lives. It can also spill over into the political world, especially when it comes to Christian nationalism. Evangelical Christianity in America has long framed itself as being on a mission to protect and promote the Christian way of life. Much like any game with a mission, there needs to be an enemy. In this case, that enemy is anything that challenges traditional Christian values, secularism, progressive movements, LGBTQIA+ rights, feminism, and anything else that threatens their view of society. For many evangelical Christians, politics isn't just about debate or discussion. It's seen as a battle between good and evil. Again, they refer to it as spiritual warfare. When you believe that the stakes are this high, that the future of society and your spiritual well-being, your eternity in heaven or hell, when you believe that this is at risk, every political win feels like a major victory. So when policies like banning abortion, restricting LGBTQIA+ rights, promoting religious practices like prayer in schools, when all of these gain traction, they're not just political moves. They're seen as winning a battle in the larger spiritual war. And when things start to go the other way, when progressive policies pass or religious freedoms seem to be challenged, but really it's just religious tolerance that's promoted, this can feel like losing that spiritual war. For those who see the world through this lens, it's not just a policy debate. It's a form of persecution, a sign that they need to fight even harder. Again, this doubling down. And that's where Christian nationalism really becomes dangerous. By framing politics as a fight against something eternal, as God's favor, the idea of winning becomes all-consuming. The belief that everything, abortion laws, gay marriage, religious practices in public spaces, these all must align with a particular interpretation of Christianity, and this leads people to justify extreme actions in the name of this so-called spiritual war. When the stakes are this high, anything seems fair game. Pushing others to conform to a specific set of religious beliefs becomes justified as serving God, and the problem with this is that it doesn't leave room for other perspectives, other beliefs, or the freedom to think differently. In a nutshell, Christian nationalism uses this mindset of religious gamification to convince people that their role on earth is to impose their version of Christianity on everyone around them. It creates a clear us versus them mentality where protecting Christian values means controlling the political and social landscape. This way of thinking doesn't leave much room for understanding or empathy or tolerance for those with different beliefs or lifestyles, and it can lead to division, fear, and intolerance. So now let's talk about what happens when you leave the game of religion. Leaving the Christian faith can be a deeply transformative experience. For many, it's not just a shift in belief, it's a complete reimagining of life, identity, and purpose. For those of us who had spent our entire lives following a specific religious path, stepping away from Christianity can initially feel terrifying. Everything you've been taught to believe, from moral standards to your purpose in life, suddenly becomes uncertain. The rules that once guided your every move no longer apply, and the sense of belonging within a community that shared the same faith, it starts to fade. And at first, this can be a deeply unsettling experience. You might experience guilt, grief, being unsure if you've made the right choice or if you're just abandoning the right path. And the fear of being lost without a clear direction can feel overwhelming. After all, when everything you know has been built around the idea of living according to a certain set of rules, rejecting those rules can leave you questioning everything. Who are you without the church, without the doctrine, without Jesus, without the promise of salvation or the pressure of eternal judgment? But with time and introspection, I promise you something shifts and you begin to realize realize that you don't have to live by someone else's standards or scorecard anymore. The idea that you need to earn love, salvation, or meaning slowly begins to lose its grip, and the rules and dogma that once dictated your every action lose their power. And instead of feeling like you need to meet certain criteria to be worthy or to understand your place in the world or to be a part of the spiritual warfare, you start to see that you are free to define these things for yourself, and you can build your own framework for understanding life and what it means to live it fully. And this realization is the foundation of secular spirituality, a concept that allows you to find meaning not through rigid systems, but through curiosity, connection, and the freedom to explore life on your own terms. Secular spirituality isn't tied to a specific religion or set of beliefs. It's about finding a sense of purpose and connection with the world around you without relying on those supernatural beliefs. Instead of living in a world where everything has a clear right or wrong, secular spirituality invites you to embrace the unknown and the uncertain. And again, this can be really intimidating at first because you have to, think critically and use your own sense of curiosity to explore things. But this encourages you to look at life through a lens of curiosity and always seeking new experiences, insights, and understanding. And honestly, it's like a lot more fun. And it's not about finding a one-size-fits-all anymore. It's about creating your own journey based on what resonates with you personally. And it just feels much more aligned, I swear. And this flexibility can be freeing, allowing you to grow and evolve without the fear of being wrong or right. Another benefit of moving away from Christianity is the opportunity to build deeper, more authentic relationships, because many people raised in religious communities often feel pressure to conform to specific beliefs, behaviors, and expectations. And this can create a sense of disconnection between individuals as relationships become based on shared doctrine rather than shared humanity. When you let go of religious dogma, though, you're free to connect with others on a deeper level beyond the confines of a shared belief system. You can build relationships based on mutual respect, empathy, understanding, rather than a shared religious identity. And this allows for a more inclusive, open-minded approach to connection, where differences are embraced and celebrated rather than viewed as divisive. Secular spirituality also encourages you to engage with life in a more holistic and integrated way. In traditional religious contexts, especially evangelical fundamentalist Christianity, there's often a sharp divide between the spiritual and the secular. Religion is seen something that is separate from everyday life, something you engage with on Sundays or in specific religious contexts. But secular spirituality blurs that line and invites you to bring spiritual awareness into all aspects of your life. You can cultivate mindfulness in your daily routines, engage with nature as a source of wisdom and inspiration, and seek meaning in your relationships, work, and passions. Spirituality becomes something that you live, not something you merely practice or believe in, and it infuses your entire life with purpose, meaning, and connection. Essentially, in a secular spiritual framework, life becomes an adventure rather than a test or a game. There are no eternal stakes or final judgments to worry about. Instead, you can focus on living fully in the present moment. You can explore new ideas, relationships, experiences, and the pressure to conform to external expectation fades, and you are left with the freedom to create your own path, to live authentically and judgment-free. Finally, secular spirituality offers the opportunity for real healing. For many people, leaving Christianity can be a process of recovery from the emotional and psychological toll that rigid religions have taken. The process of unlearning shame and guilt and fear can be incredibly liberating. By embracing a more open, non-dogmatic approach to spirituality, you can heal from the wounds of religious trauma and rebuild your sense of self-worth and purpose. And I will be talking about this in future episodes in a little bit more depth. But essentially, leaving Christianity to embrace a spiritual life without religious dogma opens up a world of possibilities. It allows you to explore life and meaning on your own terms, free from constraints. It offers the freedom to define your own values and morals while encouraging personal growth and exploration. More importantly, it provides the space to live authentically without the fear of judgment or punishment. And that is why I call this podcast a podcast for free thinkers and free spirits. Going back to Kelly Clancy's book, Playing with Reality, everything I talked about in this episode suggests that while games structure our world, we can choose to step outside of them or at least become aware of how they influence us. One last quote from the book. The age-old metaphor of life as a game has paved its way into reality. Through this progression, our beliefs and our own agency has expanded. Today, we're transitioning from being players to architects of the games we move in. To me, that is the point of secular spirituality. That is the empowerment that we can find outside of religion. It means recognizing when religious experiences are being gamified and asking whether that serves our true spiritual path. It means prioritizing deep personal exploration of our spirituality over external rewards or punishment. And it means focusing on ethical living and compassion rather than winning spiritual warfare. Spirituality can be a powerful, transformative force, but when it's turned into a system of points and rewards in religion, it can become just another game to be played. And that's not the whole story. The challenge we face now is to recognize the mechanics at work and ask ourselves, are we just playing a game or are we searching for something more meaningful? In a world where we're constantly bombarded with competing ideologies and expectations, secular spirituality offers a refreshing alternative. The beauty of secular spirituality without religious dogma is that it gives us the tools to shape our lives with intention, curiosity, and the freedom to evolve. So if you're someone who's ready to step outside the game of religion, know this, you're not alone. It's happening all the time and everywhere. There's a whole world outside of religious rule books, and you get to create your own path. So I just want to say thank you guys for being here. I really enjoyed this episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback about this episode. What religious rules did you grow up with that you no longer follow? What has helped you build a new sense of meaning? Comment on this YouTube video or on other podcast platforms where the episode is published. Until next time.